Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, featuring industry thought leaders sharing problem-solving insights to help grow your business and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stewart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And on this segment of the show, I have divorce and family law attorney MariaJose Delgado of Robinson and Henry PC, and she's calling in all the way from Denver, Colorado. Now, MJ, as she's commonly known to a lot of good friends, has a wealth of experience in the area of divorce and family law, and we'll be talking to you today about a very interesting topic. She's going to be talking about identifying and valuing unusual or often overlooked types of marital property. Wow, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I can feel it in the airwaves already. So let's not keep her waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, MJ.
Hi, thank you. So glad to be here.
You're so welcome, MJ. So can you briefly, in your own words, then, MJ, describe the people who you serve and the kinds of situations that they find themselves in when they come to you for help?
Well, as a divorce and family law attorney, people come to me whenever they need expert advice or legal representation at any stage of any type of family law matter. So divorce, custody, child support, protection from abuse and domestic violence issues. So they come at all stages of the process. I always advise people out in the world to get advice as early as they possibly can when they're in a situation, especially when they are in the separation part of it. A lot can happen really quickly and unpredictably. And sometimes the decisions that a client makes in those really high stress situations can have a long-term impact on their case. So, if you can kind of feel things brewing, it's a good idea to get advice from an attorney to figure out what's the best way to situate yourself as things start to progress toward separation and divorce. But at the same time, people come to us, even when they're in the middle of their litigation process or afterwards to have us review an agreement that, they're not so sure about anymore, or to modify an order. So we see people sometimes for years, even after their divorce.
Okay, then, MJ, so keeping that in mind, and obviously anything you share with us today is not legal advice or legal assistance. Can you briefly share some of the most common misconceptions surrounding identifying and valuing unusual or often overlooked types of marital property?
Sure. Well, I guess the most basic common misconception is that the only property that needs to be identified and valued for a property division in a divorce are the larger items that everybody thinks of that have titles and statements that go along with them, such as the house, cars, retirement accounts or brokerage accounts. But there are often other types of just regular personal property that people have that can have significant value, whether economic value or emotional value. And that can easily be overlooked by even experienced divorce attorneys. For example, employee benefits, such as employee paid leave banks, can add up to several $1,000s. It's not something that people really think about very often. But one of the things that I do is when I'm going through all of the financial information for a client in preparation for the initial stages of the divorce, looking at the pay stub, you see that they have this paid leave. Well, if a company doesn't have a use it, lose it policy, and it can be accumulated even over years, that can add up to be several thousands of dollars. And if it's accumulated during the marriage, that is a marital asset. And although it's not the kind of thing that, can be, it's not that the company can give it to the ex-spouse for her to use, but, you take the value and, it would be whatever is determined to be the other spouse's marital portion of that would be offset by, a payment or in exchange for some other property. And other things such as travel rewards points. This is not something that people are always thinking about, but if a spouse has traveled a great deal for work, for example, or just, for their regular vacation travel, and they have a lot of points with a hotel or with an airline, that can be something that would represent, value to the other spouse who may not, have those points in their name. So sometimes we've thought of creative ways to apportion that among the spouse who doesn't have those points in their name. So when you're done with the divorce, it's nice to be able to go on your vacation with the points from your ex-spouse. Collections, wine collections, vintage doll collections I've seen, comic book collections I've seen, gun collections are not too uncommon in certain areas of Colorado. And they can, all of these types of collections can sometimes hold a lot of value. The trick, though, with these collections is finding a way to value them in a way that the court would hold credible. All of these things is figuring out how to give it value. A lot of people may not have these kinds of collections. I try to make a point of asking further questions of my clients when we're going through the list, asking about collections. And sometimes they'll mention it, but not necessarily realize or appreciate the value of it until maybe later on in the case. One such time that something like this happened was where, our client didn't mention anything about his RC plane collection until sometime in the process, the other spouse brought up, oh, he's got this great, very valuable RC, or like it's a radio control, plane model collection. It's worth thousands of dollars. And she was bringing this up because, she was trying to get more stuff out of it. And she knew that our client loved his collection. He wouldn't give it up. So, if he kept that and it had all of this value, then, she could get, more of the other stuff. And our client was really struggling because, also, again, as I mentioned before, how in the world are we going to value this? Where can we find an expert? and finally, he mentioned that they had a gun collection, but, kind of minimized the value of it at first. But then when she was giving him such a hard time about this, he brought it up to us. Some of these guns are limited edition and some are antiques. We could be talking about, just as much, if not more, in value than my RC plane collection. So, in that situation, it was something that we hadn't really given much attention to, in part because the client did not give much attention to it. But ultimately, when we got a gun expert in the mix, we didn't even have to get far in that process. We just mentioned, hey, we've got a gun expert. He's going to testify about, that this collection is worth, approximately X amount. And immediately she dropped the RC plane issue. I think for whatever reason, she was the one who really wanted to keep the gun collection. So we just agreed to each would offset the other, and that just made a problem go away. So that was nice.
What a great case study. That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, MJ. So with that said, and keeping in mind that today's topic is identifying and valuing unusual or often overlooked types of marital property. And for those divorcing couples that are out there listening right now, what are one or two of the most common but unknown pitfalls you'd like them to be aware of?
Probably a large one and significant one is arguing too much about them. In such as in the example that I had given earlier, that was each of these collections, while they were worth, several thousands of dollars, they were eating up that much in attorney's fees. They would have eaten up more in expert fees trying to get someone to value them. And sometimes they can really, because often these types of things can have great emotional value to people. And it can really throw a wrench in a possible global settlement. In one such case I can think of, several years ago, I remember the parties had negotiated and argued and negotiated for, I think this case went on for a couple of years, actually. And it was, house, really significant pension, alimony, child support. We figured all of that out finally. And then the last piece that they kept going back and forth about were these Eagles seat licenses, these licenses in football stadium in Philadelphia. So they had 4 seats that they had every year, and each one wouldn't give it up. And then fighting even got more narrow, like, in the event of a Super Bowl season, who's going to get the playoffs, who's going to get the Super Bowl ticket. It just kept going on. And I think we heard it from each party. Our client was certainly, suggesting that they would throw it all away, the whole deal, and let's go to court over everything again, just about these Eagles tickets. And I think part of it, and this goes, with so many things, but certainly in these kinds of types of property in particular, it becomes this symbol, I think, and each party has felt bullied by the other, during the marriage, but as well as through the whole settlement process. And this was like their final stand. So even though these tickets, these licenses were worth, a few $1,000s, sure, but they were willing to throw away, the tens of thousands of dollars that they had spent in attorney's fees and would then spend in, preparing for a trial, over these seats. So, at some point you gotta, think about the big picture and kind of do your best to set ego aside, and really think about what is it that you want out of this divorce in the end.
That seems to be one common thread, letting go of the ego to save time and to save money. Is that something that you recommend to the people who come to you for help?
It is definitely something that I always talk about. But it really is a case-by-case basis, and it really depends on what they are fighting over. I can't tell you how many times I've posed that question, you're going to pay me more money than you would be fighting over, and they say, I'd rather give you money than my ex-spouse this money, but, and I try to, give my clients some time to kind of cool off and, really puzzle things out to get beyond that. But at the same time, I had an experience a few years ago that really stuck with me. I represented a client that, we were arguing over custody or parenting time, as we call it here in Colorado. And it was a very emotional thing. The mother was being very unreasonable. I would completely agree with him on that. She's being very unreasonable. And we fought really hard with her and eventually with her attorney to get something that was close to fair for our client. And we were stuck on, I think it was one overnight a month that we were apart on. And even that was only temporary in nature. That is to say, that he would eventually get that overnight in the agreement that we planned, So I really, encourage my client and, to just let it go. He'll get that overnight eventually. I know it's not fair, but, you have to think about the bigger picture and the relationship that you want with this, the mother of his child going forward, and how a trial could have a negative impact on how they are to co-parent in the immediate future. And he took that advice, and we ended up settling. But afterwards, most clients tell me that they're happy in the end. Most of the time, people are more satisfied with agreements than with whatever the court ends up ordering. In this case, however, he came to me and said afterwards that, as he understands the why he entered into the agreement, and that, it was good to settle, but he regretted it. Some part of him regretted it because he wanted to have his voice heard. And he wanted to have his day in court. And ultimately, he told me, it wasn't even so much about that overnight. He knew it wasn't a huge deal, but he had felt so, scorned over the whole process. And ultimately, that the satisfaction of being able to tell the judge his story, that had a lot of value to him. And it was something that, I hadn't, I think, given as much attention to. Since then, I always, make sure my clients think about that as element as well. What is going to make you sleep better at night? Knowing that you didn't have to go to court and talk about all of, the negative stuff between you and your ex, or do you need that to be able to sleep at night, no matter what the judge ends up saying?
You shared quite a lot of information in a short amount of time that we do have, and I'm sure if there's somebody out there who's been listening to you so far, that you have certainly piqued their interest. So with that said then, MJ, could you briefly just share a little bit about yourself, and especially in terms of your background and your education and your experience as it relates to the topic of divorce and family law?
I've only ever practiced divorce and family law. I came into law in general from an interest in conflict resolution. I actually have a background in religious studies and interreligious dialogue, but I really became fascinated, I think, more with the impact of people's personal lives, their relationships, their intimate relationships, and how much that impacts their sense of self and how and their happiness in life and their satisfaction in life. And so when I got into law, I really just gravitated straight to family law. And I love it. It's so human. I had some training as well, pretty quickly after law school, in collaborative law and mediation. So collaborative law and mediation are both processes in which the parties try to find some kind of resolution or agreement outside of court. And, thinking outside of the box is really encouraged in these forums. And I think that that's part of why I think a lot about, these smaller types of property that can hold emotional or even some financial value. And that's not something that courts often like to handle. That is to say, they always say courts don't do pots and pans. They hate arguing over, personal property. So it's an opportunity, I think, for me to utilize that, part of my brain that wants to think outside of the box and come up with interesting ways to divide property that, the court may not feel like it needs to deal with, and that may be difficult to, divide, such as these employee benefits and, things that have that cannot be, assigned to somebody else, like rewards points, things like that. So yeah, over the years, I've just encountered it over and over again. And I think it's a fun part of what I do.
MJ, just for a moment, I'd like you to, literally just close your eyes and picture the kind of person who comes to you for help with identifying and valuing unusual or often overlooked types of marital property. Now, with that picture in mind, MJ, what final thoughts would you like to leave that person with who's listening to you right now?
Hugely important, I think, especially in this type of stuff, is to do a cost-benefit analysis. Sometimes, and we've talked a little bit about that throughout, but really, you really need to think about, what you want to get out of whatever kind of personal property. Is it an emotional thing? You need to keep it. This is personal for you. It's, reminds you of your childhood or whatever else. Or is it good for, or is the value in getting leverage for some other type of property? And keeping that in mind, the value that it has to you personally, whether it's something that you want to keep or whether it is something that you want to use to negotiate for something else that you want, how much are you spending, not just in attorney's fees, but in, also emotional energy and in time arguing over it? And as I said, sometimes courts don't want to handle pots and pans. I've had people arguing over clothes, filing motions over their clothes, and they're not even fancy clothes. They're just
That's
regular
insane.
clothes.
Oh my goodness.
It is insane. And, so you want to think about, what is this costing you in the end, and is it worth it? One way that I often, help people navigate that is just to direct them to arbitration. Arbitration is a great way to handle these kinds of issues. Some courts even have an arbitration system that they defer to for this kind of personal property. I've seen courts actually order people to do arbitration, and that's a smaller scale where, they're not paying lawyers to argue over who gets that, piano. They're sitting with an arbitrator, ideally somebody who is experienced in divorce, going to engaging a neutral divorce attorney, an experienced divorce attorney to arbitrate is a great way to do it. But yeah, each person just brings the list of things that they want to, keep and things that they're willing to give to the other person. You bring it to the table at the arbitration. It's usually a fairly quick process, and you present your arguments. You explain to the arbitrator what it is that you want and why it's important to you. And the arbitrator divvies everything up in the fairest way that they can think of. So, and then the clients are ordered, usually you agree to the arbitration to follow whatever it is that the arbitrator decides. So it's a nice way to kind of wrap things up when, you've got the agreement laid out on everything else, and it's just that personal property. I often put in my agreements, the parties agree to go to arbitration to decide their personal property and leave it at that. And then they can go and trust, hopefully, in this arbitrator to take care of that in a really cost-effective way.
Awesome. So if somebody feels they want to know more about you and identifying those hidden assets and those hidden collections, how would they be able to connect with you? Where would they find you?
Well, I am right now at Robinson and Henry. I just joined this firm not too long ago, and it's great. We're a great team here for family law. We've got a few offices in the Denver metro area. I'm in the Denver office, and we've got a great website where you can get lots of information on me, on the other members of the family law team here. And You can give us a call, send us an email, any one of those things, robinsonandhenry.com.
Excellent. And I'll ensure that a direct link to your profile is on the show notes underneath your interview, which I can only say has been great. It's been a really interesting conversation with a unique, what I can only describe as a unique topic that you've brought to us today. So thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, MJ. You certainly have demonstrated that you're a true educator and advocate for your client's success. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stewart. It's been a pleasure.
You're so welcome, MJ. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to you, the listener, for joining us on this insightful and informative conversation with one of the top divorce and family law attorneys in Denver, Colorado. So make sure you do check her out. Her name is MariaJose Delgado, and I'm sure you're going to be in good hands. So again, I'm Stewart Andrew Alexander, and we'll be back shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.